As a scientist, I can tell you that Sundays are only 24 hours long. But with NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV, you get every game every Sunday all in one place. That's upwards of 30 hours of NFL in one day. How can there be 30 hours in 24 hours, you ask? I have a theory. Magic. New users get NFL Sunday Ticket for 8 payments of $34.50 per month. Sign up at NFLSundayTicket.com. Local and national games on YouTube TV. NFL Sunday Ticket for out-of-market games excludes digital-only games and commercial use. Terms and embargoes apply. Availability varies.
Vitamin Water Zero Sugar has great taste, zero BS, and obviously zero sugar. For those with zero room in their calendar. Zero patience for slow walkers. Those who get 0 hours of sleep on a Saturday night. Have zero filter, zero given, and zero interest in grabbing a plain, boring water. Grab a delicious Vitamin Water Zero Sugar today.
Raise the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an Enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. Start converting your B2B audience today. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started today at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn and welcome to How We're the Podcast. And with the England circus now behind us, we can start getting excited about the real stuff getting back underway, and we can start to look ahead to the trip to the capital at the weekend as well as everything else. So luckily, I have a couple of people with me to help me talk through it all. And first up, we have a familiar voice from down under. That is Martin Wonders. Hello, Martin.
Hello, Chris. Yeah, look, I think the international break's been nice in some respects. It's given us a time to reflect on what's gone on over the summer and the start of the Premier League season. But yeah, the time's come now. I'm itching for us to get back into action and watch some proper football, shall we say.
Yes, looking forward to getting into talking about it. And I'm not sure the people who put themselves through watching the Andorra game would describe it as nice, but there you go. But yeah, and yeah, we had Andy Sixsmith on the other day actually, and he was telling us about how he's kind of talking to the players and some of the interviews he's done, and he's talking to the managers and the press conferences. And we are lucky enough to have another voice today who will no doubt you recognise from the managers' press conferences, because we're very pleased to be joined by none other than Tyne-T Sports presenter Simon O'Rourke. Welcome, Simon.
Hello, nice to be here, and I feel basically exactly the way Martin feels about the last 2 weeks.
I think everyone does. I keep kind of asking people just to find those people who go, "Oh, I love it. I can't get enough of the international break," and you'll not be surprised I haven't heard one yet. But yeah, Simon, how's it going?
Yeah, good. I mean, really, with the international break, it's a bit of a cliche, but it's basically the plumbers from Kent who like the international break, isn't it? And then the rest of us are just waiting for the proper stuff to come back.
Yeah. Well, I've heard whispers the Serbia game was good, but I genuinely, I think I forgot it was on, to be honest. And I was doing other things. But Simon, I was looking back, and actually before, in the kind of preparing for this, I listened to the last time we talked, which was in, I want to say April. It was just after the Swansea game. So it would have been April the 13th or something, just after that first defeat. And how little did we know what was going to happen? And it was interesting listening back to that, where basically we with that Swansea game, we tried to avoid talking about the football. And that was the first defeat in that run. But it's ridiculous where we stand now and how much has happened since then.
Isn't it? I mean, you think of all that went through, you think that sort of weird existential worry that everyone had when they basically just sort of not didn't bother, but just used the last 4 or 5 games to just get themselves ready for the playoffs. And it was an approach that's very uncommon in English sport and English football. But look, the proof was in the pudding. And then obviously we all lived through those incredible playoffs. I mean, nobody's ever going to forget the Dan Ballard moment, and absolutely nobody is ever going to forget Wembley, the whole weekend, and the Tommy Watson moment. And that's only the football side of it, because then subsequently we've had this incredible summer transfer window and the good start as well.
Yeah, we'll get into that, but just very quickly, because I listened right at the end, and the last thing I said was, "Have you booked your hotels?" And you had a long pause before you just went, "No, I'm not going to do that." And but just look up. I mean, that it must be up there with some of the events you've reported on over the years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, look, I know this is not why we're here, but if you take away the sort of colours, think about a 95th minute winner in a championship playoff final and all that that entails, and the money that that earns the victorious club, and just the absolute pleasure and pain on both sides of that moment. It was an absolutely incredible moment. I mean, that just doesn't really happen very often, doesn't it? And it certainly in recent years hasn't happened to Sunderland very often.
Yeah. And just quickly, last word on that, Martin, for a second, just because I mentioned it to Jonathan Wilson the other day, and he made a statement about it. He said the best day, I think he said something like the best day in Sunderland's history since the 1973 Cup final, and potentially it's up there with that. I mean, is that a fair statement?
Well, I think you could make a very strong argument for it being one of the biggest, if not the biggest, moment or game in the history of the club because of what it then enables and what it entails. 73 Cup final, fantastic. And it's obviously gone down in folklore 50 years on. People still talk about it. But the next season, we were still in the second division. We played a couple of ties in Europe, of course, but it didn't have a massive impact on the club. It was a great achievement. But what followed it was more of the same as what's gone before. So I think if you look at games that actually matter in terms of the trajectory of the club and what it's enabled, and you look over the summer at the money we've been able to spend, the players we've been able to attract, compared to what Sheffield United are doing so far this season, like it's poles apart, worlds apart. So I would actually, I think you could. I'm not going to, but you could make a really strong claim for that being the most important victory in our club's history. And obviously it depends what really follows it over the next 2 or 3 seasons. But as we sit here now at the start of September, middle of September, looking forward to resuming the Premier League action, you could make a pretty compelling argument for it being right up there, I think.
Yeah. Just quickly on that, Simon, just looking back at that, because it might help in the context of what we come on to in terms of press coverage, but did you get the feeling during that playoff that in terms of national media that they were all kind of, there seemed to be I want to say bias, but a slight kind of weighting towards Frank Lampard getting promoted or Chris Wilder getting back into the Premier League? It seemed that Coventry and Sheffield United were a little bit more favoured in terms of that being the better story.
I don't think that's unfair to say. I think certainly the Lampard narrative was quite popular with the national press. He's a nice guy. He's brilliantly impressive in press conferences. His team's pretty good and he's done a good job at Coventry, and Coventry would have been its own sort of story if they got promoted. So yeah, I think that's definitely true. When it got to the final, I just think the expectation was, like, logically, you look at the way the league table finished and you think, well, Sheffield United were probably going to win. And I can tell you that I don't think the national press would have found it very interesting if Sheffield United had won, because it would have just been another case of a club yo-yoing between the divisions. So I don't think there was a great deal of belief that Sunderland would pull it off, but I do actually think there was quite a bit of interest once they did.
Yeah. And just kind of moving on where that press coverage has gone, because before we get on the football side, I'm just wondering, Simon, what it's been like behind the scenes when you've kind of rocked up this season, because we've been obviously League One for so many years and then the Championship for a few years. I mean, have you found, getting back into things this season, there's a bit more of a scrum for coverage, and are you used to a bit more space before more people rocked up for press conferences?
Yeah, the first one, the West Ham game, it was hilarious kind of at the academy. So you can imagine what it was like during League One, but think about like a garden variety midweek November away match on a Tuesday night in the Championship. You didn't get hundreds of people turning up on the Monday for Regis's pre-match press conference. Whereas for this West Ham one, there was not a spare seat in the theatre where they do it. And all the sort of regional guys who cover football for the national papers, they were all there. Sky was there, where Sky Sports were there, where they weren't. And this is not me having a go at them. They just weren't regular visitors last season and the previous seasons when Sunderland weren't in the Premier League. Obviously, you've now got Premier League productions coming to the pre-match press conference as well, and for fairly obvious reasons, they were not there last season either. So suddenly it is this standing room only thing, and you've got like Phil Smith at the front and Barnsley at the front, and me and a couple of people from Look North who've been there all the way through when it was like Shrewsbury away and things like that. And you chuckle to yourself a little bit.
Yeah. Is there not an element of, hang on a minute, I was here through the bad, this is my spot?
I know what you mean, but you know what? Truthfully, it's actually just nice to see that room full. It's nice to see the sort of the caliber of reporters who were there who thought, I've got to come and cover Sunderland now. And that was just nice to see again. It's another of many examples of the club feeling like it's ready to move back up in the world.
Yeah. And actually, Martin, you've said a couple of times that you've seen, that Australia, you're out there in Australia and Sunderland have been on the back page of the newspapers or one of the main headlines in the sports and all this sort of stuff. And, being away from the Premier League for almost a decade, I think it's moved on since then, but it's even kind of surprised me, even though I lived through those 10 years in the Premier League, that just the pure global coverage now, and that you find, Sunderland seemed like we're everywhere. You switch on Sky Sports and we're on there. It's either the highlights or it's running back through the games. And it's just kind of blown my mind after all those years outside of it.
Well, the Premier League for a long time has been a very global competition, hasn't it? And it's attracted players from all over the place and it's attracted fans from all over the place. And I must admit, when we were out of the Premier League, I paid little attention to what was going on in the Premier League.
Yeah,
I did. I think there was one point in League One where I was like, I need to watch some good quality football, so I'm going to watch some Premier League for bits. And I tried to kind of keep up a lot with it, but you kind of just revert back to watching League One highlights to see what the next opposition's doing. So, look, that's kind of roundabout way of saying I hadn't really paid that much attention to it in that time that we were out of it. And coming back into it, I think I've been surprised at how big the interest is, even here, right? And, as Simon says, you've got that narrative of Sunderland coming back up from falling all the way down, come back up. It's not a team that's been bouncing up and down for the last few seasons. There's a different story, a different team, a different set of players, manager, all that sort of stuff. But it's that huge club coming back, historic club coming back. I think anybody who knows a great deal about football understands Sunderland's historic place in how the size of football clubs or league titles or all that sort of stuff. And we've seen the screenshots, haven't we, of when Liverpool won the title, and you had the list of how many clubs had won titles, and Sunderland was still on that list. And we've had that sort of little drip feed reminder into people's sort of psyche that Sunderland is still a big club, always have been a big club. But it has really surprised me the amount of awareness about what Sunderland are doing, what the Premier League's doing. I've had people who I literally haven't heard of for 6 or 7 seasons, messaging us about Sunderland. Whether that says more about my friendships with them or not, I don't know. But I've had messages from people I haven't spoken to who I used to work with for 6, 7 years ago, pinging this message about Sunderland. And it's just on everybody's radar. You turn on the TV on the morning, football results coming in, Sunderland's on TV. You go onto the press sites, Sunderland's getting mentioned. Certainly after the West Ham game, because obviously that was the first game back after a long time. So look, it's all reflected in the amount of attention that we're getting. What Simon's talking about in terms of those journals coming along that haven't seen you for 8 years, how you been doing? It's like Nick Barnes said when he turned up at Turf Moor and saw people who he hadn't seen for 8 seasons. But it's great. And look, that's what we want Sunderland to be. We want Sunderland to be as big as we possibly can. And, so far so good. But it's, and whether it's changed or not in those years, or whether it's just our perception of what we've got used to, I don't really know. But look, it's just nice to be back, and it's nice to feel part of the main conversation again.
Yeah, that's it. And we talked as well towards the end of last season, Simon, about the club preparing almost facilities and preparing the players for the Premier League. I mean, can you see that in action when you've gone back in this summer?
Yeah, very much so. They've done an awful lot of work at the Stadium of Light. I mean, I'm sure people will already have talked about the new press facilities at the Stadium of Light, which are really, really good. I'm a non-rights holder now in terms of Premier League footage with ITV, so I don't get to see down sort of where they do the immediate post-match stuff. But I'm told that that's all been spruced up as well. And I think we discussed last time that they were actually getting players and specifically Regis used to the idea that you might have to go bang, 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 bang along 4 quick-fire interviews after matches, and it's been pretty good. I'm sure we'll come on to sort of like behind the scenes stuff and how that's gone, but I've been reasonably impressed. In fact, you know what? I've been very impressed with the way that they've gone about sort of preparing themselves for this and understanding what's coming. And I think media-wise that they're actually keen to engage, especially, you know, with the major broadcasters, because they realize they're back and they've got to present the positive image and they've got to say, look, we've been away, but now we're back and now we want to be part of the conversation. And I think they've put a lot of work into getting themselves ready and getting themselves in a position to try and do that well.
Yeah, we had a couple of comments from a couple of journalists, Simon, again, from from behind the scenes, and they were saying they were having conversations with each other, and they were saying they were coming back to Sunderland after all those years. And actually, when they were in the place and in around the place, they were actually turning around saying Sunderland really look like they know what they're doing, and almost like they're already ahead of the game and they're not kind of scrambling for all of this. I mean, do you get that feeling that, you know, that they're being kind of managed well behind the scenes and they've got a good handle on it?
Yes. Press facilities is a good example of that, but I think it extends way beyond the idea of press facilities. It does look and feel like they know what they're doing and they know what they want to achieve and they know what they feel they need to achieve off the pitch, let's say. Yeah, I'm pretty impressed with what I've seen so far in that side of things.
Yeah. I mean, Martin, when we get these sort of comments, I mean, we always look at the football side of it, but it's always reassuring to know that when you've got people who are good at their job and high-profile people turn around and they come up to Sunderland and they turn around and say, yeah, they know what they're doing there.
Well, it is. You know, what it does for us, I think, as fans, it gives us validation of what we've kind of hoped was going on over the past 4 seasons. You know, there's been lots of talk about things going on behind the scenes since Kira Louis-Dreyfus and the rest of the people sort of came in. And, you know, a plan was talked about, wanting to do this over a period of time. And sometimes it's hard, isn't it, to kind of see the evidence immediately. You see little bits and pieces happening, but it's sometimes hard to kind of see it all come together. And I think, you know, even if they'd written the script, it couldn't have come together in the most wonderful way as it did in the sort of second half of last season. But, you know, what's impressive to me is it wasn't as if we were 10 points clear of Christmas and it was really obvious we were going to get promoted. You know, we had a lottery ticket, right, really, and we could get promoted, but, you know, the odds were that we wouldn't. They had done all of this work behind the scenes on that 25-30% chance that we were going to go through the playoffs. And I think that's remarkable because it could have been so easy for them to go, we'll park that, we'll concentrate on right here, right now, and we'll park the rest of it until we know the outcome. It would have been so easy for them to do that. But the fact that they were, you know, as Simon said, you know, getting the players to do the interviews and getting the manager to do the extra interviews and all that sort of stuff in preparation. And look, if it doesn't happen this time, it'll stand us in good stead for next time. But I think it's just all been, so far, you know, and touch wood, but so far it's all been validation that off the field and, you know, on the field it looks like we're heading in the right direction, that they've actually got an awful lot of things right and all of the work that was going on, the amounts of money that they spent or didn't spend in the last 3 or 4 seasons, it wasn't necessarily them being tight. It was with a longer sort of plan in place to ensure that we could spend to the volume that we needed to spend should we go up or when we went up. And I just think it's nice for us, you know, and I think we can kind of don't want to pat ourselves on the back. We've been generally supportive of what's been going on behind the scenes because we kind of see what the intention was. And I think it's nice for all of us as a group of fans, I'm talking about the wider Sunderland supporter base here, to see that really come off and reap its rewards.
Yeah.
Just to say on that, I think there's a recent historical point with this as well, in that without it ever being expressly said, I think probably the majority of fans just stopped trusting whoever was running the club and stopped believing that whoever was running the club actually knew what they were doing. And we're still at a point where people are getting their head back around the idea that these guys do actually know what they're doing now. There is a plan.
Yeah.
And I think sorry, Chris, I think that's a really interesting point as well, because, you look back at Sunderland's owners and what we've actually had to trust, and at various points we have put a lot of faith into some different degrees. You look back and Stuart Donald, etc., park that one. Ellis Short, it looked good to start with, and then that all kind of came tumbling down. Niall Quinn it was great to start with, but again, external factors probably impacted that. But even when you look back at Bob Murray, there was an awful lot of points in Bob Murray's tenure that they were chanting Murray out and protests against him, and that wasn't all plain sailing. It might look to people who look back who weren't around then that Bob Murray's tenure was really quite plain sailing, but there was an awful lot of ups and downs within that. So, in living memory, we haven't necessarily had an ownership group or chairman who we can 100% kind of get into. So it's understandable why there's been some reluctance or hesitance to kind of do that. And look, that's not to say you put 100% behind everybody and believe conclusively. You have to have a little element of doubt sometimes. But I think I just don't think the club's been in a better position off the field than I can remember in my lifetime. I'm struggling to think of a time that was. So it's all looking positive.
Hey, it's Paris. I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
This episode is presented by State Farm. Having insurance isn't the same as having State Farm. It's like expecting the leadership of a team captain on the football field, but getting a sea captain. You wouldn't settle for just anything for your team. Shouldn't it be the same for your insurance? So don't settle for just any insurance when you can go with a leader. State Farm. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Deborah had to have surgery.
I had hip surgery in November of 2024.
Her United Healthcare nurse, Crystal, checked on her.
We do a routine call after surgery, and I could tell that she was struggling.
Deborah needed help.
My infection markers were through the roof.
And Crystal knew what to do.
I called the hospital and said she's coming in.
And got Deborah the help she needed.
Crystal and United Healthcare saved my life.
Hear more stories like Deborah's at uhc.com. Benefits, features, and/or devices vary by plan area. Limitation and exclusions apply.
Positive. Yeah. Well, on the subject of the club not being tight, let's get into the summer. Because they came right out the block, Simon. And I think none of us expected anything like this. And especially early in that summer, after, I think the fear was after Bellingham left, everyone was worried about other players, and we hung on to Enzo Lafay. But from where you stood and the people you talked to at the beginning of the summer, did you get any hints that were going to go in as big as they did?
Absolutely not. I've not spoken to anybody who saw this coming, to be perfectly honest. Sort of imagine like a boxing match where the underdog comes in and lands a couple of punches, and you sort of think, oh, well, that's interesting. But then goes on to keep landing punches and doesn't take a backward step and just keeps piling in and keeps landing punches. And that's how it's felt, because it was 30 million, then it was 20 million. Then do you remember that week where they signed a player for round about 20 million about every day for 3 days in a row? And no, absolutely, hand on heart, did not see it coming at all. I didn't see the sort of the strategy coming. I didn't see any of it coming. I've tried to understand a bit more about it now, and now I think I do understand it more from a football and a financial point of view. But it's brave. It's been very brave and very ambitious. And again, the ambitious, I think people were probably entitled still to wonder what the level of ambition would be even after the playoff final win. But I mean, it's been comprehensively answered. They are having a go.
Yeah. Hey, were you impressed, Simon, in terms of how they seemingly methodically went about it in terms of plugging positions and we seemingly had a profile in the attacking positions and a profile in the defensive positions.
Yes, absolutely. I was also interested that whilst they've not and they will not move away from the model that they've established over the past 3-4 years, you see that they're less rigid because they've signed, well, obviously a very high profile player over 30, but they've also signed players, especially in the defensive positions. Well, there's a couple over 30 as well as Granit Xhaka, but in the defensive positions that they're not as young as the players that they've prioritized signing. They've recognized the need for, a few whiskers on the chin. And I've been interested in that. Yes, you're right to say at the other end of the pitch, it's looked like they've done things in a slightly different way, which is more towards their traditional model. Very interested in all of it, and just very, very, very interested in the kind of ruthless nature of it as well. In looking at the squad of the fourth best team in the Championship last season and coming to the conclusion that that squad was not going to be good enough to compete in the Premier League.
Yeah. It's a good point I wanted to kind of raise. And Martin, I mean, just talking about the kind of the pace that we went at, and again, going back to when we spoke to Simon, I think at the time, Chris Rigg was linked with a 30 million move to Spurs. Joe Bellingham was linked everywhere. Dan Neil was, oh no, he's got a year left on his contract. He might be away. Dennis Cirkin might be away. And we're talking, a few months later, and our natural position was to get worried about all of that. And now it's like, well, if they stay, they stay. If not, it's almost a shrug of the shoulders now.
Well, it's that sliding doors moment, isn't it, of the playoff final and going up, because it changes everything. And look, if we'd stayed down and we hadn't gone through the playoffs, chances are, obviously Bellingham would have gone regardless, but the chances are Chris Rigg would have been picked up by somebody. Cirkin, very likely, if he'd been injury-free, would have. Dan Neil, very likely, would have been picked up by somebody else. So it's changed everything, and like you can't understate that. It's changed absolutely everything about this football club. And again, it's baffling because we went and had a conversation, you and I and some others, around transfer deadline day, kind of going, Chris Rigg, does he go out and loan at the Championship?
Yeah,
You kind of got to that point now, and as I've said previously, it's almost like we fast forwarded 3 seasons in this pre-season. But they've obviously looked at everything and gone, look, to have a chance of staying up, and still it's a chance, we've got to do this. And I think we're starting to see it play out now, aren't we? With Alan Brown's gone away this week and made comments and stuff like that. I think we're kind of starting to see the repercussions of us taking that approach. But I don't think you'll find anybody who will go, you know what, you should have let that team come up and take a chance, because we all just know how big that gap is.
Yeah. And like the feeling behind the scene, Simon, speaking to people, I mean, are you surprised how, and I kind of almost like little sentiment that the club have had with that, where they've almost kind of said, well, okay, you were in to do that job, and now we're getting other players in to do this job?
Yes, I have. I mean, I'm a regional guy, so I think I'm probably guilty in the way that supporters are of you. You can kind of fall in love with your team and the players you cover, can't you? And think, well, I really want to see what happens with this player and moving on up and that. And that's often not the best way to do it. I mean, the last few years is littered with examples of teams that have come up and in January realised that what they came up with wasn't going to be good enough. And by that time, it's too late. And Sunderland have got out in front of that problem because they took a very dispassionate look at it over the summer and thought, we need to upgrade in almost every position. And I've still got a lot of time for a load of the players who got Sunderland into the Premier League who are currently not in the first choice 11. But I can't say that the decision that in the short term it needed upgrading was wrong, because I think we're seeing the proof of that pudding play out in front of our eyes so far this season. Because whilst many of the players brought in don't have direct Premier League experience, the club obviously thought these are players that are ready to play in the Premier League, whereas we're not sure that some of our existing players are ready to play in the Premier League. And as I say, it's been fascinating to watch, and it's a bit unusual because you rarely get this sort of like complete changeover in terms of a starting 11 between seasons. But hey, you just got to roll with it so far, haven't you?
Well, you say you've got to roll with it, and as fans, we can say that. But Martin mentioned the comments from Alan Brown when he's been asked about it, obviously on loan at Middlesbrough, and I suppose there is and he I say hinted, he basically made a comment that there's one or two who are clearly not happy with the way the club have almost discarded them. Is there a danger of then having that split? And I imagine it's something you've really then got to work on as a club when you've got these players who have been just moved aside for these new players coming in.
I mean, yes, it is. There's an obvious danger of that. Of course there is. And I can't imagine that at some point there's not going to be people banging on the head coach's door. And I can't imagine there's not going to be the odd cross word because, yes, there's a load of people who are heroes one minute who are sat on the bench the next minute. But there's the fans' perception of football and there's the players' perception of football. And those, I'm fascinated, the older I get, of how very different those are. Fans see everything through a sort of an emotional spectrum. Players are much more businesslike. Players just realize, well, it's down to the fact of the head coach thinks that this is the best team at the moment and I'm not in it. And they're never going to be happy if they're not in it. But it's not quite that emotional reaction. It's more transactional. It's more businesslike. So this is the way. If you see 10 new players coming in of a good standard, then you understand that there might be a chance that you're going to be sat on the bench for a little bit. There's the African Cup of Nations coming up in a couple of months as well, which is going to very much change the dynamic as well. So it's not as if these players are not going to be needed throughout the season. And also, just think back of any season that you guys have been fans. What a season looks like in August is never what it ends up quite being in terms of the team when you get to February or something like that. So I don't think it's these players won't get their chances. But you are right. There is that danger that there's going to be noses sort of way out of joint, and that could affect the group dynamic. Results are obviously going to help. I don't know. They at the moment they seem to have got that side of things right. They've still. I think it's notable things like the new contract for Luke O'Nien, stuff like that. Where they're looking to take care of the dynamics of the wider group as well as the first 11. It won't be easy, of course it won't, but so far, so good.
Yeah. And I've said before, Martin, Simon's just talked about the emotional kind of pull of being a fan with some of these players. And I went back in the day on one pod, I was saying that I couldn't wait to see the likes of Martin Scott and Richard Ord and Kevin Ball in the Premier League going way back. And I wanted them to play in the Premier League. As a player, can you imagine that? You go through all that work and they just go, well, no, I should be rewarded with at least a crack at it.
I think it's a really interesting conversation, isn't it? Because I think over the past 30 years, where the power lies in football has shifted dramatically. Before the Bosman ruling, which all of us are old enough to remember pre-Bosman, but there'll be a lot of people who are listening are probably scratching their heads going, well, that's right. Clubs held, even if a player's contract ran out, clubs held the registration of that player and they still had to go for a fee. So they went to a tribunal and all that stuff. The player could move, but it was still at a fee. And, it's shifted significantly over the past, 30 years or whatever it's been since the Bosman ruling came into place. And as I think players are used to having the decision in a lot of cases. I think players are used to deciding to, I'll run my contract down and see what's out there. I will take this step. Of course, you've got the exceptions to that, particularly when players are coming through and they're young and the clubs will release them. But once they've kind of made it professionally, they're generally kind of in charge of where they go next, certainly in the Premier League and Championship. And Alan Brown hasn't been in charge of this decision. Now, I think his comments are really interesting because, if he was a player who played 46 games last season and was a stalwart of the team, then you could potentially understand it. He started 13 games for us. So it's not as if he was a mainstay in the team. And look, who knows what they said to him last summer in terms of, we want you to come, we want you to be a leader, we want you to be in the team, we want you to get us to Premier League and you'll have the opportunity. But look, he could have stayed at the club and fought for his place. And as Simon rightly says, the African Cup of Nations in December, January presents an opportunity. An injury or two presents an opportunity. So, he could have stayed and really tried to get his place. I don't think he would have got into that team. I think there's an awful lot of players who would get into that starting lineup ahead of him. And look, realistically, he probably knows that. I think his comments were they were good in terms of you don't hear players speak like that very much anymore. It was very it wasn't guarded. It was very open and honest. Look, I think really Alan Brown has been treated well by the club, because they could have said, you're not going to Borough. We're not going to lend you to Borough. You can go to Preston, you can go to Blackburn, and you can go back down there, but we're not going to lend you to Borough. And I know from reading other things beforehand, he's got young kids in school, or a young kid in school, just started school, wanted to stay in the area, and that move enabled him to do that. So I think, you go back to other conversations that we had about the club looking to do well for the players, whether they're at the club or they're moving out on loan. And I actually think, he probably owes the club a little bit of gratitude for sort of setting him up with the Borough move, as opposed to, because they could easily have said, nah, you're not doing that. You get down, back down to Lancashire.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a bit more like one of my favourite films is Moneyball. When it comes to this stuff, it's a bit less emotional than you might think, and it's a bit more, Jeremy, you've been traded to the Phillies, and it's just business.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, just on that, it also 12 months ago, I think Middlesbrough were ahead of us in the pecking order for promotion, and it just shows what can happen in 12 months. But the other thing, just behind the scenes, Simon, in terms of those new players, I mean, I've been surprised how much they've taken to the. And when I say taken to the club, they've almost understood things that the club is about. That you see them making a slide and tackle and realizing that if they react with the crowd, they'll get a boost from it, and they can use the crowd. And a lot of comments about what the club are about. It seems to me, and you might have seen more or heard more about it, but it seems to me that there's a big education process going on when the new players come in to tell them what the club is all about.
Yeah, I think they've got the messaging within the squad pretty good. I don't think it's been complicated messaging. I think it's been, kind of a Ladybird book version of what you think of Sunderland Football Club as being, the hard-working area, the passionate fans, and I think they've just played on that. I think clearly they've got massive buy-in from Granit Xhaka, who clearly, the second he walked in, was going to be the most influential person in the squad. I do think it's important that you've still got guys like Luke there in the background to sort of take care of maybe wider squad issues as well, especially while he's not able to compete to be in the first team just at the minute. He's still, I think, quite near to getting back from his injury, but still there. But yeah, you're right. I think there's been a kind of short, sharp, simple messaging given to the new signings, so they kind of understand what is, if you like, emotionally expected of them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Martin, we've got to be kind of surprised how quickly those players have settled in terms of not just what I've just mentioned, reacting with the crowd and understanding the club, but Michael Bridges made some comments about how the players have seemingly just taken to playing alongside each other and kind of understanding each other.
I think that was part of the rationale about getting players in early, wasn't it? So you had time to work with them on the training field. They had time for them to understand what Lebris wanted from them, both in possession, out possession, the style of play, what the responsibilities were. And I think that's been one of the most impressive things, is that we've kind of seen that team come together, but understand individual roles, understand where they should be in the system that they should play in. And I think that speaks volumes about a settled manager. And yes, we've had backroom changes, but they've been ones that we've made to improve the coaching and all that sort of stuff. So I think it says a lot about Lebris in terms of how he's communicating it, probably a very simple but very clear message about how he wants his team to play and how well drilled they are. And look, I think as we've always talked about, haven't we? So get the players in early for pre-season training. They'll have 6 weeks to prepare. But it's right, bringing players in June is a completely different proposition to bringing them in August. And I think you're seeing some of that benefit now.
Yeah.
Just one aside on that subject. When I left a press conference, well, it was obviously for one of the 3 Premier League games we played so far. I was just driving out and I noticed that Granit Xhaka had stopped, because another thing that you notice in the Premier League is you get more autograph hunters, people wanting selfies and shirts signed at the training ground, as it's happened at Newcastle for years and years. Used to happen at Sunderland, then it dropped off a bit, and now it's happening again. What I thought was very interesting was, normally you'll get players will either choose not to stop, which is up to them, or stop, roll the window down, take a couple of selfies, then drive off. Thought, 2 months into his Sunderland career, it was very interesting that Granit Xhaka had stopped the car, turned the engine off, got out the car, and was taking selfies with people by the side and signing shirts. It was like, this is part of my job. I'm happy to do this. I'm not going to just sort of do this dismissively. He got out of the car. And that I thought was really impressive to see.
Yeah. Were you behind him beeping your horn at that point saying, come on, I've got places to go?
I mean, for God's sake, Granit, you know.
Just sign a couple, for God's sake. But yeah, just because Martin and we mentioned the manager just there, Simon, we actually, I think we forget about the job that he's had to do, and we're talking about blending those new players and managing the old players and managing those situations. And how have you found him in press conferences throughout the summer? Because there was the midway point where he said, where everyone was going, "Oh, amazing! You brought these players in." He went, "Yeah, I still want my experienced players." And you kept making these little comments. And how do you see how he's dealt with everything in the summer and the start of the season?
Really well. I mean, he's coming. I think he sees himself as sort of the tip of the sword in that he is the head coach, so it all comes down through him. But I think there's a lot of teamwork within the coaching group as well. But it's all been done really well. He's also already come out with one of the less flashy, but to my mind, best comments of the Premier League season so far, which was after the first game against West Ham, where, to paraphrase slightly, he says, "When you have a chance to win, win, because it will not always be possible." I think that for somebody who's not managed in the Premier League before, he's very aware of what the team is walking into this season. And he just seems to be that sort of quiet, I'm not going to use the word genius, but, that quietly effective guy at the head of an organization who more often than not seems to have a knack of making the right decisions.
Yeah. Is he changed at all? But, talking to a big kind of press pack in the Premier League, or is it the same kind of person as we saw last season, or is he a little bit more guarded? Or
not right. The only difference I can see so far is that his tracksuit bottoms on the touchline seem to be slightly better fitted than the baggy ones he wore. I mean, big up to Hummel for that. No, honestly, I don't really see a great deal of difference in his behaviour or his manner at all. He just seems to be the same studious Regis that he.
As a sports fan, I have to confess, sometimes the game gets kind of boring. That's when I unfold my Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7 and use multi-window viewing on its large screen. Boring game? I'm checking out my fantasy baseball league at the same time. Score still 1-0? I'm replying to emails in the other window, scoring points with the boss. Semifinals finally getting exciting? I'm buying tickets to the finals and booking my flights. Can your phone do that?
The new Galaxy Z Fold 7. Get yours at Samsung.com.
Mint is still $15 a month for premium wireless. And if you haven't made the switch yet, here are 15 reasons why you should. 1, it's $15 a month. 2, seriously, it's $15 a month. 3, no big contracts. 4, I use it. 5, my mom uses it. Are you playing me off? That's what's happening, right? Okay, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
For a limited time at McDonald's, get a Big Mac extra value meal for $8. That means 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun, and medium fries, and a drink. We may need to change that jingle.
Prices and participation may vary.
It was last season.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just going into you mentioned the West Ham game, and and I thought, he was kind of right, of course, because he is that quiet genius, as you quite rightly said there, Simon. But that game could have went either way, and it was a game of chess between him and Graham Potter for a good while, where they were both tweaking the formations, and the game was ebbing and flowing, and it's like all 3 games could have went either way on those big moments.
Yeah. So. That's fascinating because it's the story of the season, and I think it's going to be the story of the whole season as well. Because you're absolutely right. Because West Ham were the better team really in the first half, weren't they? If not the better team, then they looked the more effective and menacing team. And Sunderland got their first lesson in Premier League reality, which is basically there are no weak links in Premier League teams. Everybody is just better. Every level is just better. And Sunderland stayed in that game when the going was tough in the first half. And then games changed in the second half. They took the lead. They went on to win the game. It kind of went the other way at Burnley, didn't it? And then it was a slightly different dynamic to the game again against Brentford. But I think one of the keys to it, and I think one of the things Lebris is very aware of, is that he's not coming up to reinvent the wheel tactically. He is going to look to make Sunderland very hard to beat. He's going to look to stay in games and then see if the opportunity to win the game presents itself.
Yeah. And Martin, just on that, we've seen especially the 2 home games, because again, things might have been very different if Mayenda had put that chance away early on at Burnley, but especially in the 2 home games, those small tweaks that he makes in games, as the West Ham game that we're talking about, and then we go to the Brentford game and 87 minutes, we said we might have been happy with a point. He sticks Guiu on 87 minutes. And it's these things where actually in the Premier League, people talk about why these managers get teams promoted and then maybe get sacked. Doesn't make them a bad manager. But actually that jump up to the Premier League, they have to then earn their money by making these small decisions. That gets a point here or 3 points here.
Well, they do. I think this season as well, he's got more options from the bench to change things during the game as well. I think last season, for a long period of time, he didn't have the luxury of having a number of game changes on the bench. So we've built a good squad that's kind of enabling him to do it. Look, you're right. We've talked about it before, haven't we, in terms of each of those 3 games could have gone either way. I think what they've obviously decided upon, and his approach in it was the last 3 or 4 minutes of normal time, but it was the last, 10 minutes or 15 minutes of the actual game with the injury time that was played against Brentford, was they've obviously pinpointed opportunities where, right, we should go for it here because it's a really good chance of getting 3 points. And that's what it felt like against Brentford. It was kind of like, actually, 3 points is going to be open to get here. We're just going to go for it. And I think we'll see that in home games. If it's tight in the last few minutes, we'll actually go for the 3 points, because that's actually more valuable than the potential of losing the 1 point, depending on where the opposition are, of course, in the league and all that sort of stuff. So I think we'll kind of see a bit more bravery at home. And, I've been, confident's not the right word, or maybe it is the right word, but I've been kind of assured about having Lebris in charge going into the Premier League, because we saw last season, he's really pragmatic. And that's what you need. I think you need pragmatism above all else as a manager in the Premier League. We've seen the idealistic managers come up, and, you look at Vincent Kompany, you look at Russell Martin, you look at people like that who have stuck to their ideals about, how football should be played, which to my mind is complete bollocks anyway. But they've stuck to it without any bend. And Lebris will play the style of football he thinks is best and take the approach tactically he thinks is best to get an outcome that's positive from that particular fixture. And that'll be different to the next game as it was the game before. And I think that'll serve us really well. And I think the players buy into it because they can see that. But, the players have got to be really tactically astute as well to do that and mould to that too. And I think, going back to the signing of Granit Xhaka, that's evidently one of the reasons that they wanted him in, because he can kind of help that happen on the field. He's involved in coaching already, not necessarily at Sunderland, but you've seen videos of him leading coaching sessions of younger players and all that sort of stuff. He's obviously minded to do that sort of element of the game. And I just think he's going to be increasingly important as the season progresses to make sure that Lebris's instructions and, and you talked last season about the players having to solve problems on the field. The players having to adapt in real time to solve this and spot the problems. And I think the more experienced players you get, and look, it was said before, these players that we've brought in aren't necessarily, bar 1 or 2 exceptions, aren't necessarily proven Premier League players, but they play Champions League football, they play national football, they know what they're doing. And you've kind of got that aspect to it as well, which I think is a really intriguing one to watch as we go along.
Yeah. Sam, just based on what Martin's been saying, we'll bring in the topic of the late goals. I think, we've scored late goals in 5 of the last 6 or something like that games. I mean, is that just a coincidence of the circumstances of the games, or does it kind of tie in with what Martin's saying where we identify those situations?
I think Martin's spot on. I think Lebris is very good at sensing opportunities. I think all effective head coaches and managers kind of have the gift for sensing a moment and sensing when it's time to put the foot down on the pedal or when it's time to take a step back and say, no, we have what we hold. And I think Lebris and his coaching staff are actually pretty good at sensing those moments. And let's put on an attacking substitute. Let's push a little harder because this is an opportunity. And go back to that quote, when there's a chance to win, because it might not always be possible.
Yeah, I think at the end of the season we'll see where that one gets us. But the other one, Simon, to be interesting, and something that I guess he's going to be quizzed on because Lebris has been nominated for Manager of the Month alongside Maresca, some Scottish fella, and Slot as well, Liverpool. But I imagine he just doesn't care about these things.
No, he's not. He seems a genuinely egoless bloke. He's all about winning. I think he sees it as puzzles he's got to solve an individual football match. I think he wants to find a way to win a football match rather than look impressive in front of his coaching peers, if you know what I mean. He's never going to pull a Russell Martin or anything like that. There'll be times where he'll probably play or at least switch to 3 at the back or even put 2 up front just because he wants to change the shape of a game. He'll just do what he thinks is the right thing to do to unpick that puzzle on a certain day.
Yeah, and just generally, we mentioned the 3 games in total, but Simon, how have you seen us? I mean, you know that I think those games have been pretty close and on a knife edge at times. But how have you seen the first 3 performances?
Sensing opportunities, taking advantages because they've got 2 wins from the three, and all 3 of those were winnable games. And let's not kid ourselves. So the 3 opponents that they've played so far, I would expect to be 3 of the bottom 6 or 7 in the Premier League at the end of the season. If you look at the next batch of 4 games, going up to the next international break, Palace away, Villa at home, Forest away, Man United away. So 3 away games for a start, and any away games is going to be difficult. Villa might be a little bit above the others. Like Man United, that really, really strange entity where they're still Man United, but they're actually not very good. But basically, those 4 games are against better teams. All 4 of those teams that they're about to play are better than the teams that they've played so far. So it's going to be fascinating to see what it looks like. We take the first 3 as a block. When you take that 4 as a block as well, it'll be fascinating to see what's gone on and how Sunderland have looked against that level of opposition, because there's still 2, 3 higher levels still to come.
Yeah, I mean, but Martin, you've said before about those fixtures that it's interesting that that is kind of talked about because it's just a fact that they are 3 of the lesser sides, if you like, who are going to potentially be down there. But the pressure was on, though, wasn't it, for us to get points against them?
Well, the fixture list's only friendly if you win them. It could have been, it could be really nasty if we'd come out of those 3 games with 1 point or no points, because it's very different coming out of games against Chelsea, Man City, and Arsenal with 1 point and no points. If we'd gone into those 3 games that we've had and not get a decent point return, everyone's thinking, "Oh shit, here we go." So it was kind of high risk, high reward, really. And I was kind of nervous about how those 3 games would play out. And thankfully, we got a decent points return. And it's almost like the temperature's been just turned up a little bit. We're not turned up to boiling yet, but you kind of just raising the temperature with the next 4 or 5 games. And hopefully it'll let the players get bedded in, settled in. The players get used to playing with each other. A bit more team spirit, which can only be built up really by playing proper games and competitive games and coming through adversity and winning games together. That can only be built up by doing that. So by the time we get into that run of fixtures that we've got in November and December, where you look at them and go, boy, we are back in the Premier League here with this run of fixtures. Hopefully we've got a decent amount of points on the board that the players have confidence in what they're doing, what the manager's doing. We've got confidence that can compete at this level. We've got confidence in the strikers can score goals at this level. The keeper can save at this level. And everything hopefully could build up to to give us a fighting chance.
Yeah, I was just thinking because Jonathan Wilson was saying this. He started off by saying, it's still going to be hard, and then Simon, he said, oh well, next up's Palace, they've got problems. Then it's Forest, they've got problems. So then it's Villa, they've got problems. Then it's Forest, they've got problems. So he says, "Oh, actually, we could be top of the league after the next 3 games."
I think Martin's just made a good point. I hadn't really thought about it, but he's first of all quite right to say that it's only a good fixture list if you win the games. But it is giving them quite a nice natural ramp up, because you start against less good teams, you graduate onto better teams, and then you don't actually get the sort of elite teams until comparatively down the line. So it is sort of a nice gentle upward curve until the point where it becomes less gentle, and it's going to be like sort of jumping up 5 levels at a time. It's interesting. Fascinated with the next few games. Really encouraged, and people do need to be realistic. There are going to be days like Leeds' trip to Arsenal a couple of weeks ago. There's going to be days like that. But I'm already confident enough to think that, I don't know, we'll get there in a minute. But just on the fixture list point as well, do you remember last year Ipswich started with Liverpool at home and Man City away? And that just ultimately it's just horrible, isn't it? Because you get the stuffing knocked out of you quite badly in the first week, and you think, oh my God, this really is going to be as hard as we thought it was going to be. Whereas Sunderland have just got that perhaps slightly better opportunity with the fixture list to sort of gradually just step up.
Yeah, and Palace at the weekend, Simon, they've had 1 or 2 issues, but they keep proving that they're a good side. So it's going to be a big test. But I mean, the way I'm looking at away fixtures this season is, if we get a point, absolutely brilliant. I mean, ecstatic if we get a point anywhere. Basically, just pick those little points up away from home.
I think it's going to be really tough. I think there's a few little elements here. With our new squad, there's players literally all over the planet flying back now who won't get back to Sunderland for more than 1 training session, if it's even a full training session. That's a side of things that the football club's not had to deal with for 10, 12 years. I do think Saturday will be a really hard game. Also, like, you might have seen the statistic that, weirdly, if you take this season and last season, currently Crystal Palace are on a longer unbeaten run than any team in the Premier League. Now, a lot of them have been draws.
Thanks for that, Simon.
They're just. I do think it's going to be tough for Sunderland this weekend. But look, they've surprised me in almost every aspect so far this season. So it won't surprise me if they surprise me again.
Yeah. And just quickly, Martin, on the Burnley game, because that's our only other away game so far. But we always want to win games and we don't want to lose them. But do you think that was almost we might look back on that as a good thing, like maybe we did against Chelsea all those years ago under Peter Reid, where we got hammered, where it's a good early reminder that it's going to be tough and you need to get that goal when you get the chance, like Labrie commented on.
Oh, look, I think the Burnley game we'll look back on as being a real anomaly of away games, because I would put money on the fact that will be our only away game where we have less possession than the home team. Sorry, we have more possession than the home team, and the home team have less possession than we have. Burnley played us our own game, and I don't think many other people will. They let us have possession. We missed an early chance, which we should have scored. We missed another early good chance that we could have scored. And they just sat back and let us have the ball and try to counter on us. Now, that's exactly what we'll do to every other team that we play away, pretty much. So I actually think we'll just kind of look back on that as a bit of a random one. And yes, look, I think it's if you take the positives out of it, you'll see it's a good reminder that you can go anywhere and get beat. Every game is difficult, blah, blah, blah. But I think, realistically, they all knew that beforehand anyway. And I think it's just... I think it was just a strange game, and I think that's Burnley kind of almost outdid us tactically, but in a really kind of blunt and obvious way, which doesn't really make that much sense. But if you can't get what I mean, because I think if we put our chance away, again, as we've said before, right, it's chances. You go back to the West Ham game, if Bowen scores in the first half, it's a completely different game. If Brentford score the penalty, it's a completely different game. The games turn on such small moments, or that turn out to be big moments, that we just need to make sure that we take those opportunities when they come along. It's a cliche, isn't it? But it's like we need to be in every single game. And again, I just don't think there'll be another away game where we have more possession than the home team.
And last word from you, Simon, because look, we all know it's going to be tough, but do you think Sunderland have showed enough in those first few games that we then can go on and go, well, we know now we can compete and we're going to at least make the best effort to stick around in the Premier League for another season or two?
Yes, exactly that. I think I'm pleasantly surprised. I'm cautiously optimistic, and I'm almost ready to say they won't be Ipswich, Leicester or Southampton last season. I think that they are going to be able to compete to stay in the Premier League, but competing to stay in the Premier League and staying in the Premier League, they're two different things.
Yeah, well, that's a fun note to leave it on, Simon. Are you going to be at the Stadium of Light anytime soon?
Well, I've actually got a golf weekend away with my mates this weekend, so I'll be keeping up with the latest scores on the course. But yeah, I'll be at the Villa game. Looking forward to that. And I mean, the other thing to say is that the home games of the Premier League games, I should say, have felt like events as well. The stadium's looking great. When the footbridge is open full time, the whole place is going to look great. They've felt like big occasions and big events, and that's been a really encouraging sign as well.
Yeah. Hopefully, but it'll lead us to making that fortress and getting those points at home. But it just leaves me to say thank you very much, Simon. Appreciate your time as always, mate.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Brilliant. And good stuff, Martin. Thanks again, mate.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Simon.
Good stuff. And thanks again for everyone for listening. We've got loads coming up this week. We'll have, of course, our Palace guest on talking about them. So look out for that. And we'll also have our preview talking about our team selection. And we'll have loads more on top of that. So look out for that on How We're the Podcast and keep in touch with everything on the Roker Report website. But from us, it's bye for now.
This podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.